In the dead of night, a locked pantry in a lonely country manor whispers secrets no one should hear. Two voices plotting behind an iron-marred grating. A key mysteriously flipped to the inside, and a safe upstairs holding a will that could ruin a family. When Miss Jane Marple arrives at Elmhurst Manor, invited by her frantic friend, she finds a household on edge. A ruthless patriarch rewriting his fortune, a desperate son drowning in debt, a fragile wife climbing coal bunkers at midnight with a hidden camera, and a secretary selling betrayal for a price. What begins with faint murmurs beneath the study floor becomes a deadly game of forgery, greed, and midnight intrusion, until one small footprint in coal dust and a jar of damson jam lead the gentle spinster to unravel a conspiracy before a pistol is drawn in the dark. In 8 suspenseful chapters, Whispers from the Locked Pantry proves that even the sweetest preserve can hide a bitter truth. Chapter 1. The House on the Hill. The train from London eased into Willowbrook Station with a sigh of steam and a metallic screech that set the rooks wheeling above the elms. Miss Jane Marple stepped down onto the platform, her small brown suitcase in one gloved hand, a neat black umbrella in the other. She wore a dove-gray traveling coat and a felt hat trimmed with a single velvet ribbon. Nothing to draw the eye, yet everything precise. A porter touched his cap. "Taxi for Elmhurst Manor, miss?" "If you please." The cab climbed the winding lane between hedgerows, already touched with bronze. Below lay the village red roofs, a square church tower, the glint of a stream. Above on the ridge stood Elmhurst Manor, a solid Georgian house of mellow brick, its windows catching the low autumn sun like watchful eyes. Miss Marple observed it all with the mild interest of a botanist noting specimens, though her thoughts were already busy. Mrs. Bantry's letter had arrived 3 days earlier, written in a hand that trembled between indignation and alarm. "Something queer is happening at Elmhurst, Jane. I dare not put it plainly on paper. Come at once if you can spare 2 nights. Arthur is in Scotland shooting things, so I am quite alone among the Davenheims." The taxi drew up beneath a portico where ivy clung like importunate fingers. Before Miss Marple could lift the knocker, the door swung inward. A parlor-maid, young, thin, and plainly nervous, took the suitcase. "Mrs. Bantry said to show you straight to the blue spare room, miss. She's in the drawing-room with Miss Sylvia." Miss Marple followed through a hall, paneled in dark oak. Ancestral portraits frowned down. A grandfather clock ticked with ponderous authority. Somewhere a door closed with unnecessary force. The maid's shoulders flinched. The blue spare room overlooked the rose garden, now a regiment of bare stems. A fire burned in the grate, and on the dressing-table lay a vase of late chrysanthemums, bronze and sulphur. Miss Marple removed her hat, smoothed a stray wisp of silver hair, and descended. She found Mrs. Bantry alone, pacing before the atom fireplace. Dolly Bantry had once been a beauty. Traces remained in the bone beneath the plumpness, the vivacity that no amount of worry could quite extinguish. She seized Miss Marple's hands. "Jane, you angel. I've been counting the hours." Miss Marple allowed herself to be kissed. "You look flustered, Dolly. Sit down and tell me everything from the beginning." Mrs. Bantry sank into a chintz chair. "It's the pantry, Jane, the one off the kitchen passage. Every night at 10 Cooklocks it has done for 20 years, ever since old Mr. Davenheim's mother kept the best sherry there. Only now," she dropped her voice, "Cook swears she hears whispers inside after the house is abed. Distinct voices, male and female. And yesterday morning the key was on the inside of the door, though Cook herself had turned it from the corridor the night before." Miss Marple's eyes, pale blue and deceptively gentle, rested on her friend. "Has anyone investigated?" Geoffrey laughed and said rats. Sylvia said nerves. Old Mr. Davenheim sent for the locksmith, who found nothing wrong with the mechanism. But Cook is giving notice, and the housemaids walk in pairs after dark. Miss Marple considered. "The pantry is beneath the study, you said in your postscript. Mrs. Bantry nodded. Directly. The safe is let into the floor. Above old Mr. Davenheim keeps deeds, bearer bonds, that sort of thing. He's been revising his will again. Geoffrey's debts, you know. A gong sounded in the depths of the house. Mrs. Bantry started. Dinner. You'll need them all. Prepare yourself, Jane. They're a jumpy lot. Miss Marple rose. I always find jumpy people instructive. Dolly. They betray so much without meaning to. She paused at the long mirror in the hall to adjust her lace jabot. Behind her reflection, the staircase rose into shadow, and for an instant she thought she saw movement on the landing, a flicker of white that was gone when she turned. The house, she decided, was listening. Chapter 2. The Household. The dining room at Elmhurst Manor was lit by a single chandelier whose crystals trembled whenever the wind pressed against the tall windows. The table, set for 7, gleamed with Georgian silver and glass, so thin it might have been spun by spiders. Miss Marple, seated between Mrs. Bantry and the empty place intended for the absent Mr. Bantry, surveyed the company with the polite attention she might give to a new species of rose. At the head carved old Mr. Davenheim, upright as a guardsman despite his 73 years. His hair was white, thick, and brushed back like a lion's mane. His eyes, under heavy brows, were the cold gray of winter steel. He carved the saddle of mutton with precision, each slice falling away as though measured by a ruler. To his right sat his son Geoffrey, 35, handsome in the careless way of men who have never doubted their charm. His dinner jacket was faultless, but the knot of his tie had loosened, and there was a faint flush along his cheekbones that suggested more than the claret. He talked racing form to the empty air opposite him, for his wife Sylvia had not yet appeared. Across from Miss Marple was Mr. Lyle, the secretary, a thin young man with a scholar's stoop and ink-stained fingers. He ate methodically, eyes on his plate, but Miss Marple noticed that he listened, really listened, to every word that passed. His left hand, when not conveying food, rested on a small morocco notebook. The final place was occupied by Miss Green, companion to old Mr. Davenheim's late sister, and now, by some unspoken arrangement, general factotum. She was 40-ish, neat as a wren, with bright beady eyes and a mouth that looked as though it had been drawn with a ruler. She poured water for Mrs. Bantry, and when Sylvia Davenheim finally drifted in 10 minutes late, wrapped in apology in silver lay Miss Green, rose to pull out her chair. Sylvia was beautiful in the way orchids are beautiful, fragile, expensive, and faintly poisonous. Her hair was pale gold, her skin translucent, her eyes the green of shallow sea over sand. She smiled at no one in particular, and allowed Geoffrey to serve her a microscopic portion of mutton. Conversation, never brisk, now settled into the desultory rhythm of people who have said all they mean to say to one another years ago. Old Mr. Davenheim inquired about the train service. Mrs. Bantry obliged with a harmless anecdote about delayed connections. Geoffrey drank 3 glasses of claret in quick succession and began to tell a story about a horse that had bolted at Ascot. Sylvia interrupted to ask whether anyone had seen her diamond clip. She was sure she had left it on the boudoir table. Miss Green murmured that she would look directly after pudding. Miss Marple, tasting nothing yet observing everything, noted the small currents beneath the surface. When Geoffrey's hand brushed his wife's as he passed the sauce-boat, Sylvia drew back as though the silver were hot. Mr. Lyle's pencil moved in his notebook whenever old. Mr. Davenheim spoke of settlements or provisions. Miss Green's gaze flicked from face to face like a lizard's tongue tasting air. The pudding apple charlotte, with a custard so rich it must have taken a pint of cream, was halfway consumed when old Mr. Davenheim laid down his spoon. "I have decided," he announced, "to execute a new codicil tomorrow. Lyle, you will prepare the necessary papers. I shall require 2 witnesses." The silence that followed was not the silence of digestion, but of held breath. Geoffrey's glass paused halfway to his lips. A drop of claret trembled on the rim and fell, staining the cloth like a bead of blood. Sylvia's eyelashes flickered. Miss Green folded her napkin into exact quarters. Mrs. Pantry, ever practical, broke the spell. How sensible, Mr. Davenheim. One never knows with these lawyers. My cousin's husband died intestate, and the inland revenue? Quite, said old Mr. Davenheim, cutting her off with the same precision he had used on the mutton. Lyle, you will attend me in the study at 10. The secretary inclined his head. Certainly, sir. Coffee was served in the drawing-room, a long apartment paneled in pale green silk and furnished with uncomfortable elegance. A fire crackled in the marble grate. Above it hung a portrait of old Mr. Davenheim's father in the scarlet coat of a militia colonel. The eyes followed one about the room. Sylvia excused herself early, pleading a headache. Geoffrey lingered over the decanter, then announced that he must telephone his bookmaker something about a horse running at Lingfield tomorrow. Mr. Lyle retired to the library with a murmured apology about correspondence. Miss Green busied herself with the coffee cups, stacking them with the soft clink of porcelain. Mrs. Pantry drew Miss Marple to the window seat, out of the firelight. There, she whispered. Did you mark it? The codicil. Geoffrey's been losing heavily, at cards again, bridge mostly, but there was talk of a gambling club in Jermyn Street. Sylvia spends as though the Bank of England were her private purse. And old Mr. Davenheim has found out. Miss Marple's gaze rested on the dark garden beyond the glass. A thin mist was rising from the lawn. The yew hedges looked like sleeping animals. Found out what, precisely? She asked. Everything. The debts, the dressmaker's bills, the pearl necklace. Geoffrey gave Sylvia that turned out to be paste because the real one had gone to pay a bookmaker. Mr. Davenheim threatened to cut Geoffrey off without a shilling. And now this codicil, Miss Marple considered. The pantry is directly beneath the study, you said. Mrs. Pantry nodded vigorously. The safe is let into the floor old-fashioned, but supposed to be burglar-proof. The combination is known only to Mr. Davenheim, and I think Mr. Lyle. The pantry door is the only one that opens onto the passage beneath. And the whispers? Always after midnight. Cook says 2 voices, 1 deep, 1 light. Words indistinguishable, but urgent. And the key, on the inside, Miss Marple finished softly. Yet Cook locked it from the corridor. Mrs. Pantry shivered, though the room was warm. It's unnatural, Jane. I don't hold with ghosts, but— Nor do I, said Miss Marple. Ghosts do not move keys. People do. Geoffrey sauntered in, glass in hand. Talking secrets, ladies? Shame on you. His tone was jovial, but his eyes were glassy. Mrs. Pantry rose. We were discussing the weather, Geoffrey. It looks like rain. Rain, he repeated, as though the word amused him. Always rain in this blasted house. He drained his glass and set it down with a click. I'm for bed. Early start tomorrow. Must see a man about a dog. He winked at Miss Marple and lurched toward the door. When he had gone, Mrs. Pantry expelled a long breath. He's drinking brandy now. I smelled it. And Sylvia takes veronal. Miss Green counts the tablets every night, says she's afraid of an accident. Miss Marple stood. I think I too shall retire. A long day, and I find new houses tiring. In the hall, she paused beneath the militia colonel's portrait. The eyes seemed to watch her ascent. On the landing, she met Miss Green carrying a tray with a glass of milk and 2 tablets. For Mrs. Geoffrey, the companion explained. Doctor's orders. Miss Marple smiled. How thoughtful. Good night, Miss Green. Good night, Miss Marple. The blue spare room was quiet. The fire burned down to embers. Miss Marple undressed methodically, folded her clothes over a chair, and slipped into bed. But she did not sleep. At 11:30 she rose, put on her dressing gown of quilted silk, and opened her door a crack. The corridor was dark, save for a thin line of light beneath the study door. She heard the muted clack of a typewriter. Mr. Lyle, no doubt, preparing the codicil. At 12, the typewriter ceased. Footsteps crossed the study. The light went out. Silence. Miss Marple waited. At 12:15, she heard another sound lighter, almost stealthy. A door opened and closed. Then nothing. She stepped into the corridor. The house breathed around her. Boards settling, water pipes ticking. She moved along the carpet runner until she reached the baize door that led to the servants' stairs. Beyond it lay the kitchen passage and the pantry. She eased the door open. The passage was in darkness, but a faint glow showed beneath the pantry door candlelight, perhaps, or a shaded lamp. From within came the murmur of voices, low and hurried. A man's baritone, a woman's contralto. Words were indistinguishable, but the rhythm was that of conspiracy. Miss Marple's hand found the cold brass knob. It turned, but the door did not yield. Locked, she bent to the keyhole. The key was in the lock on the inside. She straightened, her mind racing. Someone was in the pantry. Someone who had entered after cook locked up, and who had then turned the key from within. A floorboard creaked behind her. She turned swiftly. The passage was empty, yet she had the unmistakable sensation of being watched. She retreated to her room, closed the door softly, and sat on the edge of the bed. In the grate, a coal fell with a small explosion of sparks. "Curious," she murmured to the sleeping house. "Very curious indeed." Outside, the mist thickened, swallowing the moon. Elmhurst Manor kept its secrets close, but Miss Marple had taken the first small stitch in the pattern. She would need only patience and a few more threads to see the design entire. Chapter 3. Midnight Miss Marple did not undress again. She sat in the small velvet chair by the window, a wool rug over her knees, and watched the luminous hands of her traveling clock creep toward one. The house had settled into that particular hush that comes after midnight, when even the clocks seem to lower their voices. She had drawn the curtains back an inch. The mist outside pressed against the glass like wet wool. At 12:45 she rose, slipped her feet into felt slippers, and took from her suitcase a small electric torch no longer than her hand. She had purchased it in London after a previous adventure involving a cellar and an unreliable candle. Progress, she reflected, was not to be despised. The corridor was colder than before. A draught moved along it, carrying the faint scent of damp stone and, more curiously, of printer's ink. She paused outside the study door. No light showed beneath it now. The typewriter had long since fallen silent. She descended the main staircase with the caution of a cat. The hall was lit only by the dying fire in the drawing-room grate. Its glow threw long shadows across the tessellated floor. The militia colonel glared down at her from his frame, but she paid him no heed. She was intent upon the green baize door. It opened without a sound. She had oiled the hinges herself with a drop of sewing machine oil from her workbox. Beyond lay the servants' domain. Flagged passages, the faint smell of yesterday's cabbage, the colder smell of coal. She moved swiftly, the rubber soles of her slippers noiseless. The kitchen was vast and shadowy, the great range still warm. Copper pans hung like moons above the dresser. On the deal table lay cook's bunch of keys, each labeled in faded ink. Larder, still room, pantry. Miss Marple selected the pantry key and weighed it in her palm. Heavy Yale, well worn. She slipped it into her pocket. The pantry door faced her across the passage. No light showed beneath it now. She put her ear to the panel. Nothing. Yet the air felt disturbed, as though someone had only just departed. She inserted the key. It turned easily, too easily. The lock had been used recently. She pushed the door open an inch and listened again. Still nothing. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The pantry was larger than she had expected, a stone-flagged room with shelves to the ceiling. Rows of jam jars glinted. Gooseberry 1938, damson 1939. Sacks of flour and sugar stood in the corner. A ham in a muslin bag hung from a hook. The air was cool and smelled of apples and spices. Miss Marple switched on her torch and played the beam slowly around. The grating high in the outer wall was exactly as Mrs. Pauch had described, iron bars set in stone, no more than 8 inches across. She stood on tiptoe. Beyond lay the scullery yard, black and wet. A coal bunker stood directly beneath the grating. Its lid was closed. She turned her attention to the floor. The flags were old and uneven, but in the dust between 2 of them, she discerned the faint outline of a footprint, small, narrow, the mark of a woman's court shoe. It pointed toward the shelves of preserves. She followed the print. It stopped at the dancing shelf. There, between 2 jars, a third had been pulled forward an inch. She eased it out. Behind it was a cavity in the stone, roughly brick-sized, newly hollowed. The mortar was fresh. Crumbs of it lay on the shelf. Miss Marple's torch beam lingered on the cavity. Empty. Whatever had been hidden, there was gone. She replaced the jar exactly as she had found it and stepped back. The footprint continued 2 more prints, then nothing. The intruder had stood here, removed something from the wall, and then vanished. She examined the door. The key was now on the outside of the lock, exactly as Cook had left it. Yet someone had been inside after midnight and had left without using the door. The grating? She measured it again with her eye. Too narrow for shoulders, but a slender woman or a child might wriggle through. She thought of Sylvia Davenheim, reed thin in her silver lame. A sudden sound made her switch off the torch. Footsteps in the passage, heavy, masculine. They paused outside the door. The handle turned slowly. Miss Marple stepped behind the flour sacks and held her breath. The door opened. A beam of light stronger than hers swept the room. It was Geoffrey Davenheim, a pistol in one hand, an electric lantern in the other. He was in dressing gown and slippers, his hair tousled, his face grim. He crossed to the damson shelf, pulled out the jar, and shone his light into the cavity. A soft oath escaped him. "Damn the woman," he muttered. "She's taken it." He replaced the jar, turned, and left, closing the door behind him. The key clicked in the lock. Miss Marple waited a full minute before emerging. She tried the handle. Locked, as expected. She was now a prisoner in the pantry. She considered the grating again. Too high, and she was not built for contortion. The door was solid oak. She ran her fingers along the shelves. Nothing. Then she noticed the ham. It hung low, almost at eye level. The muslin bag was tied with twine. She lifted the ham gently. Beneath it, on the flagstone, lay a small Yale key different from Cook's, newer, brighter. She tried it in the lock. It turned smoothly. She was free. She replaced the ham, pocketed the second key, and let herself out. The passage was empty. She relocked the door with Cook's key and returned the bunch to the table. Upstairs, the house slept or pretended to. She paused outside Sylvia's door. No light. Outside Geoffrey's dressing room, his bedroom lay beyond. There was a faint glow beneath the door. She heard the clink of a decanter. In her own room she sat down and made notes in her small leather book. Cavity behind damson jar recently made. Something removed tonight by Sylvia? Geoffrey searches after her, expects to find it. Second key hidden under ham. Whose? Footprints cease at shelf. How did intruder leave? She underlined the last line twice. At 2 o'clock she heard a new sound. The soft creak of the servant's stair. Someone descending. She opened her door a crack. A figure in a dark dressing gown, Miss Green, passed along the corridor carrying a candle. She went toward the study. Miss Marple followed at a distance. The study door opened and closed. A minute later the typewriter began again, rapid and rhythmic. She returned to her room and added, "Miss Green types at 2 M. Codicil?" She closed the book, turned out her light, and lay down fully dressed. Sleep was out of the question. The threads were multiplying, but the pattern was not yet clear. Outside, the mist began to lift. A pale moon showed the ridge above Willowbrook, and the chimneys of Elmhurst Manor stood up like sentinels. Somewhere in the house a clock struck 3. Miss Marple listened and waited for morning. Chapter 4. The Cook's Story. Morning at Elmhurst Manor arrived with a pale, reluctant light that seemed to apologize for the night. Miss Marple descended at 8:30, her step as measured as ever, though she had slept no more than 2 hours. The hall smelled of beeswax and wood smoke. The militia colonel's scarlet coat looked almost cheerful in the daylight. Cook was in the kitchen, a mountainous woman in a print dress and apron, her face the color and texture of a raised pork pie. She was beating eggs with a violence that suggested strong feelings. A scullery maid cowered at the sink. "Mrs. Pauk," said Miss Marple mildly, "might I trouble you for a cup of tea and a word?" Cook's whisk paused mid-air. "Tea you shall have, miss, and welcome." As for words, she jerked her head toward the scullery. The maid fled. "Sit you down." Miss Marple took the Windsor chair by the range. The kitchen was warm and fragrant. Bacon frying, bread baking, coffee percolating. Cook poured tea from a brown pot into a thick white cup and set it before her guest with a plate of shortbread still warm from the oven. "Now," said Cook, folding massive arms, "you'll be wanting to hear about the pantry." "If you please." Cook drew a long breath. 23 years I've been at Elmhurst, man and boy well, woman and girl. Old Madam Mr. Gavenheim's mother kept the best sherry in that pantry, and the key on a nail by my bed. Never a whisper, never a creak. Then 3 nights ago, she broke off to turn the bacon. Fat hissed in the pan. Monday it began. House abed, clocks struck 12. I was wakeful lumbago, you know, and I thought I'd fetch a drop of the cooking brandy. I come down the back stair, quiet as a mouse, and there it was, voices behind the pantry door. Low, like folk arguing in church. A man and a woman. I couldn't catch the words, but the tone sharp, urgent. I rattled the handle. Silence, dead as the grave. I unlocked, flung the door wide nothing. Shelves, jars, the ham swinging a little, but no soul. Miss Marple sipped her tea. And the key? On the nail where I left it. But Tuesday night, Cook's voice dropped. Same voices, same time. Only when I opened the door, the key was inside the lock, turned. I had to fetch the spare from the bunch to let myself in. Empty again. Flour tin shifted 2 foot to the left, though I'd set it square myself at 9 o'clock. Wednesday? Last night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the bottom stair with a rolling pin across my knees. At 12:10, the whispering started. I crept to the door key on the outside, same as always. I listened. The woman said, clear as a bell, "Tomorrow, then." The combination. The man answered something I couldn't catch. Then footsteps light, quick inside the pantry. I turned the key and burst in. Nothing, but the grating was open. Miss Marple set down her cup. "Open?" "Bars is fixed, miss, but there's a little hatch for ventilation slides back on a rudder." It was pushed wide. Cold air coming in, and coal dust on the sill. I shut it, locked up, and came back to my room. This morning I gave notice. Cook's chin trembled. I'm not feared of work, nor of ghosts if ghosts there be, but I won't stay where doors lock themselves and voices plan mischief. Miss Marple rose and walked to the pantry. Cook followed, keys jangling. The door stood ajar. Sunlight from the scullery yard striped the floor. Miss Marple examined the grating. The hatch was closed now, but fresh scratches showed where it had been forced. She measured the opening with her fingers. 6 inches by 8. Could a woman pass through? A thin one, maybe. Head first, shoulders twisted. Not me. Cook patted her ample bosom. Miss Marple studied the coal bunker outside. Its lid was closed, but the hasp was loose. A finger could lift it. Coal dust lay thick on the sill inside the pantry, and on the stone floor beneath the grating, a single print small, narrow, the same court shoe she had seen in the dust last night. She returned to the kitchen. "Mrs. Pauk, has anyone lost a shoe?" Cook snorted. "Madam Mrs. Geoffrey loses everything. Gloves, handbags, earrings, shoes by the dozen. There's a pair of silver ones missing since Tuesday." Miss Marple nodded. "And the flour tin?" Cook led her to the corner. The tin, a tall red cylinder, stood askew. When she righted it, the lid came off in her hand. Inside, flour to the brim, but the surface was uneven, as though something had been pressed into it and removed. "Wednesday's baking," Cook said. "I'd have noticed if it was disturbed before then." Miss Marple thanked her, finished her tea, and went in search of Mrs. Pantry. She found her friend in the morning room, surrounded by seed catalogues. "Dolly, I need a favor." "May I borrow your gardening gloves and a trowel?" Mrs. Pantry blinked. "Of course, and perhaps a sheet of brown paper." 10 minutes later, Miss Marple was in the scullery yard, kneeling beside the coal bunker. The lid lifted easily. Inside, among the lumps of coal, lay a crumpled sheet of typing paper, thin and cheap. She unfolded it carefully. It was a carbon copy of a legal document, the top line reading, "Codicil to the last will and testament of Reginald Arthur Davenheim, Esq." The text was incomplete, ending mid-sentence. "All former bequests to my son Geoffrey Reginald Davenheim shall be revoked, and in lieu thereof." The rest was torn away. Miss Marple folded the paper into her handkerchief and replaced the lid. She brushed coal dust from her gloves and returned to the house. In the hall, she met Mr. Lyle descending the stairs, a sheaf of papers under his arm. He looked pale. There were ink smudges on his cuffs and a streak of it across one cheek. "Good morning, Miss Marple." "Good morning, Mr. Lyle. Working early?" "The codicil," he said shortly. "Mr. Davenheim wishes it ready by 10. He hurried past. Miss Marple watched him go, then climbed to her room. She locked the door, spread the carbon copy on her dressing table, and examined it with a magnifying glass. The typing was even professional, but the ribbon had been changed recently. The letters were sharp. At the bottom of the page, in the margin, someone had penciled a row of numbers. 1824931. She copied them into her notebook, then burned the carbon in the grate, grinding the ashes fine. At 9:30 the breakfast gong sounded. Miss Marple descended to find the family assembled. Sylvia wore a peach negligee and looked as though she had not slept. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Geoffrey was unshaven, his hand shaking as he poured coffee. Old Mr. Davenheim read the Financial Times behind a barricade of toast. Miss Green muttered rolls with mechanical precision. Conversation was minimal. Geoffrey announced that he must motor to London after luncheon urgent business. Sylvia said she might lie down. Old Mr. Davenheim grunted and turned a page. Miss Marple ate kedgeree and observed. When the meal ended, she followed Mr. Lyle to the library. "Mr. Lyle, a word." He turned, startled. "Yes?" "That codicil, has Mr. Davenheim signed it yet?" "Not yet. 10 o'clock. And the combination to the safe?" His eyes narrowed. "I really couldn't say. But you know it." He hesitated. "Mr. Davenheim trusts me." "Of course." "Tell me, do you ever work in the pantry?" "The pantry?" He laughed, too loudly. "Hardly. Yet you were there last night." Color drained from his face. "I was in the study until 2. "Typing?" "Yes. Alone?" "Quite alone." He gathered his papers. "If you'll excuse me?" He almost ran. Miss Marple returned to the morning room. Mrs. Pantry looked up from her catalogues. "Well, the net tightens," said Miss Marple. "But we need one more thread." She glanced at the clock. 9:50. In 10 minutes the codicil would be signed. She thought of the numbers in the margin, the cavity behind the damson jar, the footprint in the coal dust. She thought, too, of the second key under the ham. Chapter 5. The secretary slipped. The library at Elmhurst Manor smelled of morocco leather and old paper, with a faint undercurrent of pipe tobacco that clung to the curtains. At 10 o'clock, precisely, Mr. Lyle entered, carrying a foolscap folder tied with green tape. Old Mr. Davenheim was already seated at the mahogany desk, a fountain pen uncapped before him. Miss Green stood by the window, hands folded, ready to witness. Mrs. Pantry had been pressed into service as the second witness. She looked uncomfortable in her flowered morning dress. Miss Marple lingered in the doorway, unnoticed for the moment. She watched Mr. Lyle lay the codicil on the blotter. The old man adjusted his pince-nez and began to read. His lips moved silently. The pen hovered. Geoffrey Davenheim burst in without knocking, coat over his arm, motor and cap in hand. "Signing away my inheritance, father? Charming." Old Mr. Davenheim did not look up. "You will wait in the hall, Geoffrey." "Will one?" Geoffrey's smile was thin. "I rather think I'll stay." "Moral support for the condemned man, eh, Lyle?" The secretary flushed. "This is irregular, sir. Everything about this family is irregular," Geoffrey said. He tossed his cap onto a chair and leaned against the mantel, striking a match on the marble. The flare lit his face, petulant, handsome, dangerous. Old Mr. Davenheim signed with a flourish. Miss Green and Mrs. Pantry added their names. The old man blotted the page, folded it, and returned it to the folder. "Lyle, lock this in the safe. The combination remains unchanged." Mr. Lyle bowed and left the room. Geoffrey followed him with his eyes, then sauntered out, whistling. Miss Marple slipped away before anyone noticed her. She had seen enough. The codicil was signed, the safe would receive it, and Geoffrey was in a mood to do something reckless. She found Mr. Lyle in the study, kneeling before the safe let into the floor beneath the carpet. The combination lock clicked under his fingers. He opened the steel door, placed the folder inside, and spun the dial. Then he stood, dusted his knees, and turned to find Miss Marple watching from the doorway. "You startled me," he said. "Forgive me. I came to return Mrs. Pantry's gardening gloves." She held them up. "Tell me, Mr. Lyle, when did you last clean the typewriter ribbon?" He stared. Yesterday." "Why?" "Because the codicil was typed with a new ribbon, yet the carbon I found in the coal bunker was smudged and old. Curious." His hand went to his cuff. The ink stain was still there. "I use different machines. The study one is new." "Indeed. And the numbers in the margin, 1824931. Do they mean anything to you?" For a moment he looked hunted. Then he recovered. "Dates, perhaps. Investments. I really couldn't say." He brushed past her. Miss Marple followed him into the corridor. "One more thing. Last night, after 2 o'clock, you were seen leaving the study with a bundle under your arm. Where did you go?" "I went to bed." "By way of the kitchen passage?" He stopped. "Miss Marple, I have work to do." "Of course. But a word of advice. Secrets are like mice. They gnaw holes in the wainscot, and sooner or later someone notices." He gave her a strained smile and hurried away. Miss Marple returned to the morning room. Mrs. Pantry was alone, turning the pages of the Times. "Well?" she asked. "The codicil is in the safe. Mr. Lyle knows the combination. Geoffrey is furious. Sylvia has not appeared. Miss Green is watchful. And someone is photographing documents in the pantry." Mrs. Pantry gasped. "Photographing?" A small camera could fit through the grating. The cavity behind the damson jar is the perfect darkroom shelf. Coal bunker for access, ham for the key. Ingenious. But who? That is what we must discover before the photographs leave the house. At 11 o'clock, the household gathered for coffee in the drawing room. Sylvia drifted in, pale and languid, A silk scarf knotted at her throat. Geoffrey was absent. His car had roared away down the drive 20 minutes earlier. Mr. Lyle drank his coffee black and left early. Miss Green poured for everyone with her usual precision. Miss Marple accepted a cup and took it to the window. The mist had lifted. The garden lay clear under a watery sun. She noticed a patch of disturbed earth beneath the scullery window, where someone had knelt in the soft border. She set down her cup. "Mrs. Pantry, I believe I left my handkerchief in the pantry. Would you fetch it for me?" Mrs. Pantry, trained by long friendship, rose without question. Miss Marple followed her into the passage. In the pantry, Mrs. Pantry found the handkerchief placed there by Miss Marple earlier on the flour tin. Miss Marple closed the door. "Now, Dolly, stand here." She positioned her friend beneath the grating. "You are taller than Sylvia. Can you reach?" Mrs. Pantry stretched. Her fingertips touched the bars. Could you pass a small packet through?" "Easily." Miss Marple opened the flour tin. Beneath a layer of flour lay a flat tin box, the kind used for negatives. She lifted it out. Inside were 3 glass plates, each showing a miniature image of the codicil. Mrs. Pantry stared. Sylvia, or her accomplice. The camera would be returned the same way. But the plates must be developed and printed. Where? They searched the pantry. Behind the sack of sugar, they found a cardboard box containing developing trays, a red lantern, and a bottle of fixer. Everything smelled of chemicals. Miss Marple wrapped the plates in her handkerchief. We must confront her. They returned to the drawing room. Sylvia was alone, turning the pages of a fashion magazine. She looked up, startled. Miss Marple laid the tin box on the table. "Mrs. Geoffrey, these are yours, I believe." Sylvia's hand flew to her throat. "I don't know what you mean." "The negatives of your father-in-law's codicil, taken in the pantry, developed there, hidden under the ham." Sylvia tried to laugh. "Absurd. Why would I—" "To sell to your husband's creditors," Miss Marple said gently, "or to forge a copy that leaves Geoffrey the heir. The numbers in the margin are the safe combination, written by Mr. Lyle. He is your accomplice." Sylvia's face crumpled. "It was Geoffrey's idea. He said if we had the new will, we could challenge it, prove undue influence. Lyle agreed to help for a share." Mrs. Pantry was scandalized. "But the whispers, my rehearsals with Lyle, he coached me through the grating. I climbed in after Cook locked up, took the photographs, hid the plates. Last night Geoffrey searched for them. He thought I'd double-cross him." Miss Marple nodded. "And the key under the ham?" "Lyle's spare. He was to let me out if anything went wrong." At that moment the door opened. Old Mr. Davenheim entered with Mr. Lyle. The secretary's face was ashen. "I have just spoken to Geoffrey on the telephone," the old man said. "He is at his club, drinking. He says the codicil is a forgery, and he will fight it in court." He looked at the tin box. "What is this?" Miss Marple explained. Old Mr. Davenheim listened in silence. When she finished, he turned to Mr. Lyle. "You will leave this house within the hour. Your references are forfeited." Mr. Lyle opened his mouth, closed it, and bowed. He left without a word. Sylvia was weeping. "Father, Silence," the old man said. "You will remain in your room until I decide what is to be done." He turned to Miss Marple. "I am in your debt, madam." "Not at all," she said. "Only might I suggest the pantry door remain unlocked in future? Secrets thrive in the dark." Old Mr. Davenheim almost smiled. "It shall be as you say." That evening the house was quiet. Geoffrey did not return. Sylvia kept to her room. Mr. Lyle's trunk was collected by a carrier. Miss Green served dinner with her usual calm, but her eyes were brighter than before. After coffee, Mrs. Pantry drew Miss Marple aside. "Jane, how did you know about the camera?" "I have a nephew who dabbles in photography." The chemical smell on the coal dust, the red lantern, it was obvious once one considered the grating. And the numbers? Safe combinations are often birthdays. Mr. Lyle's mother was born. The 18th of September, 1893 to 31 was the year of his birth. Simple. Mrs. Pantry shook her head. You are a marvel. Miss Marple smiled. I have known many desperate wives, Dolly, and Pantries, like people, seldom whisper without cause. Outside, the moon rose clear over Willowbrook. Elmhurst Manor slept peacefully, its secrets laid bare. And in the blue spare room, Miss Marple packed her small suitcase, satisfied that justice, like breakfast, had been served in good order. Chapter 6. The Second Whisper. The house did not sleep as peacefully as Mrs. Pantry believed. At 11 o'clock, Miss Marple, unable to settle, opened her door a cautious inch. The corridor was dark, but a thin blade of light lay across the carpet outside the study. Someone was still at work. She slipped into her dressing gown, took the little torch, and descended the back stair. The kitchen was empty, the range banked low. Cook's keys hung on their nail. Miss Marple left them untouched. She had no need of them tonight. The baize door stood ajar. She eased through. The passage beyond was cold. The pantry door faced her. Shut but not locked cook had obeyed the new instruction. From within came the faintest glow, a ruby glimmer beneath the panels. Miss Marple turned the handle. The door opened without a sound. Sylvia Davenheim knelt on the stone floor, a dark lantern at her elbow. Before her stood the small developing tray. The air was sharp with hypo. On a sheet of blotting paper lay 3 wet prints of the codicil, each perfect in miniature. Beside them was a 4th plate, still in the camera a folding kodak no larger than a prayer book. Sylvia looked up. For a moment surprise held her motionless. Then she sprang to her feet, the lantern tilting. Red light washed the shelves like blood. You, she hissed. Miss Marple closed the door. I feared you might try again, Mrs. Jeffrey. Desperation is a persistent counselor. Sylvia's hand went to the pocket of her velvet wrapper. Stay where you are. I am an old woman, Miss Marple said mildly, and quite unarmed. But if you draw that little pistol, the entire household will hear the shot. Sylvia hesitated. The hand came away empty. Miss Marple advanced a step. You have the combination, the camera, the chemicals. All you lacked was time. Mr. Lyle's dismissal left you to finish alone. Excellent definition, she murmured. But you overlooked one detail. Sylvia's eyes narrowed. What? Miss Marple indicated the camera. The lens cap. You removed it inside the pantry, but the first exposure was made with it still in place. See, the corner is black. A professional would have noticed. Sylvia stared at the plate. I was nervous. Nerves betray us all. Miss Marple gathered the prints and the remaining plate. These will go to your father-in-law. The camera also. I think he will prefer to deal with the matter privately. Sylvia sank onto a sack of oatmeal. He will send me away. Geoffrey will divorce me. I shall have nothing. You will have your life, Miss Marple said, which is more than some desperate wives retain. A sudden sound footsteps in the passage. Heavy, hurried. The door was flung open. Geoffrey Davenheim stood on the threshold, motoring coat flecked with rain, eyes wild. In his right hand was the pistol Miss Marple had glimpsed earlier in the night. Sylvia, you little fool. He stopped, taking in the scene. Miss Marple. Of course. Put the pistol down, Geoffrey, Miss Marple said calmly. You are too late, he laughed. Late? I had the combination. Lyle telephoned it to me before he left insurance, he said. I shall open the safe, remove the codicil, and burn it. Then we begin again. Sylvia rose unsteadily. Geoffrey, no. It's over. Over when I say it is. He advanced into the pantry, pistol leveled. Give me the prince. Miss Marple stepped between them. You will have to shoot an old lady, Mr. Geoffrey, and then explain the blood on the damson jam. For a moment the pantry held its breath. Then Geoffrey's arm wavered. The pistol clattered to the flags. I can't, he muttered. God help me, I can't. Miss Marple picked up the weapon and slipped it into her dressing-gown pocket. Wise, now sit down, both of you. They obeyed like children. She regarded them for a long moment. You planned this together, she said. Mr. Lyle provided the combination and typed the draft you photographed. Sylvia executed the midnight visits. You, Geoffrey, were to destroy the original once the forgery was ready. A neat triangle until greed fractured it. Geoffrey buried his face in his hands. Sylvia stared at the floor. Miss Marple continued, But you miscalculated old Mr. Davenheim's vigilance. And you forgot that pantries have ears. She opened the door. In the passage stood old Mr. Davenheim himself, dressing-gown over pajamas, Miss Green at his elbow with a candle. Behind them hovered Mrs. Pantry, eyes round. I heard voices, the old man said. His tone was granite. Bring the evidence, Miss Marple. She handed him the prints, the plate, the camera. He examined them without expression. Tomorrow, he said, I shall summon my solicitor. You, Geoffrey, will leave this house before breakfast. Sylvia will remain until suitable arrangements are made. Miss Marple, I am deeply in your debt. Geoffrey lifted his head. Father, silence. The word cracked like a whip. You have forfeited the right to call me that. He turned and left. Miss Green followed, candle held high. Mrs. Pantry lingered, wringing her hands. Jane, shall I fetch the police? Not tonight, Miss Marple said. Family matters are best settled within the family. But lock the study door, Dolly, and keep the key. Mrs. Pantry hurried away. Miss Marple faced the two culprits. Go to your rooms, separately, and do not speak until morning. They went, Sylvia weeping silently, Geoffrey like a man walking to the gallows. Miss Marple waited until their footsteps died. Then she extinguished the dark lantern, gathered the developing tray and chemicals, and carried them to the scullery. She poured the solutions down the sink, rinsed the tray, and set it on the draining board. Back in the pantry, she closed the grating, latched it, and hung the spare key on a new hook beside Cook's bunch. She surveyed the shells jars in perfect rows, ham swinging gently, flour tin upright, order restored. She returned to her room. The clock on the mantel showed 10 minutes past 12. She added a final entry to her notebook. Second whisper explained. Motive, greed, method, photography through grading. Accomplices, husband, wife, secretary. Resolution, exposure without scandal. She closed the book, turned out the light, and slept. Chapter 7. The explanation. The morning room at Elmhurst Manor was flooded with pale November sunlight. A coal fire crackled in the grate. The air smelled of toast and marmalade. Old Mr. Davenheim sat at the head of the breakfast table, the Times folded beside his plate, his face as unyielding as the marble mantel behind him. Geoffrey was absent. His place had not been laid. Sylvia sat opposite Miss Marple, pale and silent, a single cup of black coffee cooling before her. Mrs. Pantry buttered toast with unnecessary vigor. Miss Green poured tea with the calm of a woman who has seen worse. Old Mr. Davenheim laid down his spoon. Miss Marple, the household is in your debt. Before I send for my solicitor, I should like to hear the matter set out plainly. For the record, Miss Marple inclined her head. Of course. The affair is simple once the pieces are assembled. She folded her hands in her lap and began. 3 nights ago, Mrs. Polk first heard whispers in the locked pantry. The key, which she had turned from the outside at 10 o'clock, was found on the inside the following morning. Flour tins were disturbed, though no baking had taken place. The explanation required two conditions: someone inside the pantry after locking up, and a means of entry other than the door. The grating in the outer wall provided that means. It is narrow, but a slender woman, Mrs. Jeffrey, for instance, could wriggle through if she first climbed the coal bunker in the scullery yard. The hatch slides back. Coal dust on the sill inside confirmed recent passage. Once inside, Mrs. Jeffrey did not remain idle. A cavity behind the damson jars had been hollowed out. Mortar crumbs betrayed the work. There she hid a small camera, developing trays and chemicals. The flour tin served as a light-proof box for exposed plates. The spare key Mr. Lyles hung beneath the ham, ready for emergency exit. The whispers were rehearsals. Mr. Lyle, knowing the safe combination, stood in the study above and dictated it through the grating. Mrs. Jeffrey repeated the numbers to fix them in memory. The urgency in their voices was natural. Time was short, and discovery fatal. Old Mr. Davenheim's eyes rested on his daughter-in-law. Sylvia did not look up. Miss Marple continued. The object was the new codicil, signed yesterday morning. Mr. Lyle typed it on the study machine. A carbon copy, torn and discarded, was found in the coal bunker. Evidence that a duplicate existed for photographing. Mrs. Jeffrey's task was to secure images of the original once it was locked in the safe. With those images, a forgery could be prepared, substituting generous terms for the revocation clause. Jeffrey's role was destruction. He intended to remove the true codicil and burn it, leaving only the forged version. His creditors pressed. Ruin stared him in the face. Mr. Lyle demanded a share, hence his margin note of the combination. 1824931, the dates of his mother's and his own birth. The plan unraveled in stages. First, the key on the wrong side betrayed an occupant. Second, the footprint in the coal dust pointed to a woman's shoe. Mrs. Jeffrey had lost a silver pair earlier in the week. Third, the disturbed flour and chemical smells confirmed darkroom work. Fourth, the camera and plates were discovered. Finally, Jeffrey's return last night with a pistol forced the confession. She paused. The fire settled with a small avalanche of sparks. Human nature, she resumed, is a reliable guide. I have known wives who photographed wills, secretaries who sold secrets, sons who gambled away inheritances. The pantry merely provided the stage. Old Mr. Davenheim spoke for the first time. And the second midnight visit, Mrs. Jeffrey's last attempt. She believed the plates destroyed. In fact, I had removed only 3. She returned to expose a fourth, developing on the spot. Jeffrey, telephoned by the dismissed Lyle, arrived to seize the evidence and open the safe. I interrupted them. Sylvia lifted her head. You make it sound inevitable. It was, Miss Marple said gently. Greed leaves footprints, literal and moral. Old Mr. Davenheim rose. Sylvia, you will pack 1 bag. My solicitor will arrange an annuity sufficient for a quiet life abroad. Jeffrey will receive nothing further. The codicil stands. Sylvia's lips trembled, but she said nothing. Mrs. Pantry ventured. And the police? Unnecessary. The document is intact. No forgery was completed. Discretion serves the family better than scandal. He turned to Miss Marple. You will lunch with us before your train? I should be delighted. After breakfast, Miss Marple walked in the garden with Mrs. Pantry. The rose beds were bare, the yews clipped into severe shapes. A robin sang from the sundial. Jane, Mrs. Pantry said, how did you know Sylvia would try again? Desperation does not surrender easily. And the developing tray was still damp when I rinsed it at midnight. Mrs. Pantry shuddered. I shall never hear a pantry door creak without thinking of whispers. Miss Marple smiled. Pantry doors, like people, are innocent till proven guilty. At 2 o'clock, the taxi arrived. Miss Marple's small suitcase was stowed. Mrs. Pantry pressed a jar of damson jam into her hands. Cook insists, and it is the 1939, the best vintage. Old Mr. Davenheim shook her hand on the steps. Elmhurst is in your debt, Miss Marple. Should you ever need anything, I need only my train ticket and a quiet carriage. Sylvia appeared in the doorway, hat and coat, a single valise at her feet. She met Miss Marple's eyes. I am sorry, she said simply. Sorry is a beginning, Miss Marple replied. Use it wisely. The taxi bowled down the drive. In the rear-view mirror, Miss Marple watched Elmhurst Manor shrink to a red brick toy on the ridge. The whispers were stilled. The pantry door would stand open tonight and every night. She settled back against the cushions, opened her notebook, and added a final line. Case closed. Motive. Greed. Method. Ingenuity. Moral. Secrets kept in jam jars seldom stay sweet. The train from Willowbrook was on time. Miss Marple took her corner seat, placed the damson jam on the rack, and opened her library book. Outside, the autumn fields slipped past, gold and brown and peaceful. Chapter 8. Morning light. The village of Willowbrook lay quiet under a frost that glittered like sugar on the hedgerows. Miss Marple's train was not due until 11, and Mrs. Pantry had insisted on a final cup of coffee in the morning room. The fire had been laid anew. The damson jam cook's peace offering stood open on a silver dish, its scent rich and dark. Old Mr. Davenheim had gone to the study to telephone his solicitor. Sylvia's taxi had left at dawn. The driver, a local man, would see her to the London boat train without a word to anyone. Geoffrey's whereabouts remained unknown, though a telegram delivered at breakfast announced that he had taken a room at his club and would trouble no one. Further, the handwriting was unsteady. Mrs. Pantry poured coffee with a hand that still trembled slightly. Jane, I shall never forget last night. Geoffrey with that pistol Sylvia on her knees among the jam jars. It was like a play, only worse. Real life often is, Miss Marple said. She accepted a slice of toast and spread it thinly with butter. But the curtain falls, Dolly, and the stage is swept clean. Mrs. Pantry glanced toward the door. Cook is beside herself with relief. She has withdrawn her notice and is baking scones in your honor. Miss Green is cataloging the linen cupboard, says order restores the nerves. And Mr. Davenheim? Calmer than I have ever seen him. He told me privately that the codicil will stand, but he has added a clause, a trust fund for any grandchildren, should they appear. Blood is stubborn, he said. Miss Marple nodded. A wise man. Punishment without annihilation. The gong sounded for the carriage. Mrs. Pantry accompanied her friend to the hall. Cook appeared, flour on her apron, to press a warm paper bag into Miss Marple's hands. Scones for the journey, miss, and a morsel of my seed cake. Miss Marple thanked her gravely. On the steps the air was sharp. Rooks wheeled above the elms. The taxi waited, engine purring. Mrs. Pantry embraced her. You will write? Every week. And you will visit at Christmas. Old Mr. Davenheim emerged, coat buttoned to the throat. He offered his hand. Miss Marple, Elmhurst will not forget. The pantry door stands open, as you advised. I have had the grating barred permanently. A prudent measure, she said, though I fancy the whispers have migrated elsewhere. He almost smiled. To some other locked room, no doubt. The taxi bore her down the drive. In the village, the church clock struck 10. Children scampered to school. A woman shook a duster from an upper window. Life resumed its gentle rhythm, as though no midnight conspiracies had ever disturbed the peace of Elmhurst Manor. At the station, Miss Marple purchased a platform ticket for Mrs. Pantry. 1 extra minute, Dolly, and they stood together while the London train steamed in. Porter shouted. Doors slammed. Miss Marple climbed aboard, the paper bag of scones on her lap, the jar of damson jam in the string bag at her feet. As the train pulled out, she waved through the window. Mrs. Pantry grew smaller, then vanished. The fields unrolled, hedgerows neat, sheep grazing. Miss Marple opened her library book, The Listerdale Mystery, but her thoughts were still in the pantry. She reviewed the chain. The key on the wrong side, the footprint in coal dust, the cavity behind the jam, the numbers in the margin, the damp developing tray. Each clue a bead on a string. Pulled gently, and the pattern emerged. Human greed, human ingenuity, human frailty familiar as village gossip, deadly as nightshade. The guard passed. "Tickets, please." Miss Marple surrendered hers and accepted a cup of railway tea. She sipped, reflected, and smiled into the steam. At Paddington, she took a taxicab to the hotel where she always stayed when in town. The porter carried her suitcase. The jar of jam went into her string bag. In her room she unpacked, placed the scones on a plate, and wrote 2 letters. One to her nephew Raymond, one to the vicar's wife in her own village. Routine restored her, as cataloging linen restored Miss Green. That evening she dined early sole, apple tart, coffee, and retired with a new detective novel. Before sleep she added a final note to her little book. Whispers explained. Pantry purified. Family preserved, though pruned. Moral: even the sweetest preserve may conceal a stone. She closed the book, turned out the light, and listened to the distant murmur of London traffic. No whispers here, only the honest sounds of a city that kept its secrets in the open. Next morning she caught the local train home. The hedges were white with frost. The fields lay under a light snowfall. As the train slowed for her station, she saw the familiar figure of her gardener, Griselda's husband, waiting with the pony trap. She stepped down, breathed the cold, clean air, and smiled. Another case concluded, another pattern complete. The world was full of locked pantries, but Miss Jane Marple had the key.